Shortly after Mike McDaniel took to the podium and said that the Dolphins are operating as though Terron Armstead will not be with the team in 2025, Ian Rapoport had a breaking news story about the mechanics of Terron Armstead and him restructuring his contract in order to stay on the roster while he makes his decision. What does it all mean? We're looking at that here today. Locked on Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Cal Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami, and the NFL draft lead for the 33rd team. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. We don't just say it, we live it. Today on the show, Terron Armstead, this saga continues. Feels like this is an advancement of the ball towards the goal line of the final chapter of the saga. But we really need to dig into the news that came out yesterday, not from Mike McDaniel's perspective, because we did that yesterday after his podium session. And I got home and home, air quotes, Airbnb, and sat down and I did the Dolphin show. And no sooner than like an hour after I finished recording the show, Ian Rapoport had the story that broke about what Terron Armstead is agreeing to do with his contract as he tries to figure out what he's doing from a playing perspective. So here's the report from Ian Rapoport yesterday. Dolphins offensive tackle Terron Armstead plans to take his contract down to the minimum, I'm told, from the $28.6 million he was set to make. That allows the team to make all necessary moves they want to make and allows Armstead, 33, to be on the team until he makes his decision on his future. So restructuring contract, Terron this year was scheduled for $13.3 million base salary. None of it was guaranteed. I think that's important to note here because when you try to piece together who had what interests at heart here and the motivations for doing that, I think that tells a little bit of a story. Terron had no guaranteed salary on his contract, but was scheduled to make almost $13.5 million in just base salary. Agreeing to restructure it down to the bare minimum kind of gives you an indication that Terron's probably not going to continue playing for Miami. And it's more of a formality of, are you making the decision to retire, or are you going to be in a position where you decide you want to play, but the Dolphins are going to go in their different direction, and they are going to allow you to make the choice of where you play next. But this is a solid that Terron is doing for the team but it's a symbiotic decision. I think some fans saw Terron Armstead restructuring his salary down to the minimum to stay on the team, and the knee-jerk reaction is, oh, wow, Terron's willing to play for the minimum. If Terron plays this year, I can promise you it's not going to be for $1.21 million, right? He's too good of a player. Late-stage career Terron Armstead is still one of the best talents that I've had the pleasure of watch suiting up and play for this football team. He is a supremely gifted player. And I mean, you look at Tyron Smith, the offensive tackle from Dallas, who left and signed last year in free agency with the Jets. He was on the open market with medical issues that I would argue, based off the missed time that he had, was even more steep and severe than what you have with Terron Armstead. And he still managed to sign a contract that was 1 year, $5 million, but playtime incentives could have drawn that salary as high as $17 million. There is always a market for offensive linemen, especially guys that are great in pass protection. Terron is that. So do not mistake this as Terron agrees to restructure salary down to minimum. If he decides to play, he's just going to play for $1.2 million and play with the Dolphins. Now, are there pathways forward in which, they agree when Terron makes his decision that if he wants to play based on how the draft goes for Miami, could they potentially say, look, like this is kind of where we're budgeting. Is it going to work for you or is it not? And if the answer is no, then I would assume Terron would then at that point be cut. They would take whatever dead cap charges, but based off the fact that they restructured his contract down to minimum, this is where the symbiotic relationship here of mutual benefit for this decision comes in between Terron and the Dolphins. Because if Terron was going to play hardball with his salary and say, look, guys, I know what my value is. I'm not ready to make a decision. Sorry. That puts the Dolphins and their camp in a position to say, well, we have a second round offensive tackle who we just took. We can't let you hold hostage our offseason plans and budget while you figure it out, while you occupy $23 million in cap space on the roster. So if Terron wasn't willing to budge on the salary, the Dolphins, I assume, would have made a decision to either pre or post June 1st cut Terron Armstead, and he would be off the team. And the team says, we have to move forward because, Mike at the podium yesterday said, Terron's not ready to make the decision, but we are operating with the assumption that Terron Armstead is not going to be here next year. From Terron's standpoint, it benefits him to buy him the time to make the decision. So for the Dolphins, there's no pressure for them to make a transaction now, because if Terron retires, you can do what the Dolphins are doing with Terron Armstead's contract and hold him through after June 1st anyway. And I want to take this over to Touchdown Miami on Substack. I did a story talking about financial planning, the possible avenues with Terron Armstead a couple weeks ago. And this is playing like a retirement scenario in that regard. So we're going to get into that and then talk about why Terron not yet being ready to make the decision, this is still a sensible pathway for the team to take. So that's coming your way next here on Locked on Dolphins. Make sure that you guys stick with us. So I'm going to take this right over to Substack, Touchdown Miami. And this story I did, I'm going to make sure I want to get the date right here so that this is a neat and fun and good representation of Substack. This story ran on February 8th. So this ran a little more than 2 weeks ago. It's called Financial Planning, the Terron Armstead Decision. And the number one scenario that we ran through is the one that's up on the screen, which is Armstead chooses to retire this offseason. And I want to read a blurb off of it, and then I want to cite a example of something that happened in recent years with another offensive lineman who ended up making the decision to retire, and know that this agreement between Armstead and the team mirrors the first step of a possible retirement decision. Miami, in the event of a retirement, would have the luxury of processing his retirement as a post-June 1st transaction to split the remaining prorated money against the cap that's already been paid out over the course of the early years of his contract. But to do that, you need to carry the player on the active roster until June 2nd. Teams have in the past restructured a retiring player's contract to reduce the player's salary to the absolute minimum at the start of the league year in order to open up immediate cap space relief before processing the retirements after the June 1st deadline. Players typically do not mind this because they will not be playing for a salary anyway. They are retiring. So there's no cash scheduled to be received that would be impacted by what is glorified bookkeeping move to manipulate the salary cap. The Chargers achieved this exact scenario with Corey Linsley last offseason. And then it has a quote from Pro Football Talk, per Field Yates of ESPN. Linsley has agreed to a restructured contract that reduces his salary from $11.5 million to the minimum for the 2024 season. The Chargers gain $10.29 million in cap space by making the move. Should Linsley be placed on the reserve retired list after June 1st, the Chargers can spread out the dead money from the cap hit across 2 seasons. Does that sound familiar? And maybe this is all save face for Terron as he makes the decision, but he kind of already has made the decision. I don't know that. And I think it's important to note there are pathways forward for Terron Armstead to play football for the Dolphins or otherwise next year. And we're going to get into those, in segment 3 of the show. But this is the first step to a retirement scenario in which you can see on the screen if you're watching. And if you can't see, we're going to talk through it. If you restructure his base salary down to $1.21 million, he has 2 separate chunks of about $4 million of salary cap bookkeeping for cash that had been paid out when he first signed his contract or when they restructured his contract last year. It was $3.85 and $3.95 million. So you have to add those two to whatever his minimum salary is, and that gives you what his cap charge is. And remember, the way that the June 1st cuts work is if you move on from a player post June 1st, what that allows you to do is say, whatever this year's salary cap commitments are, whether it's guaranteed money or it's cap schedule for cash that's already been paid out in past years, which is what we're talking about here with this $3.85 and $3.95 million hits against the cap that you're adding together plus a salary. That is going to be the dead money that we take this season, and all remaining prorated out dollars amount against the cap will be accounted for in next year's salary cap cycle. So Miami, had they moved on from Terron Armstead at the jump, if Terron was leaning towards playing but not quite sure, and strong-arm the Dolphins on the salary at the $13.3 million for the salary point, Miami could have either moved on from Terron Armstead with a post-June 1st designation, in which case he would be occupying $23 million in cap space on the roster until June 1st, because you have to carry the cap figure, or alternatively, they could have cut him outright with no questions asked, take all of this prorated money in 2025, which is about $18.5 million, and then they just save $4.25 million against the cap. So they'll carry him. If this is a retirement scenario, he will stay on the roster through June 1st with the $1.21 million cap hit, and then they will convert him to the reserve retired list, and the $1.21 million will go away. And the cap schedule, you're only going to save an additional $1.21 million because the rest of it is prorated cap commitments for cash that he's already received. And then he'll end up carrying a dead money hit of about $7.8 million in 2025. And then you'll carry a dead cap hit of $10.73 million in 2026, which is the rest of the proration for cash that he'd received in years past. So that's the domino effect for Miami from a cap space perspective. The decision from Armstead to restructure down saved the Dolphins about $13.8 million in cap space. That number, when you add the $1.21 million for the base salary, if he retires or when they cut him and you don't owe him any additional salary because that $1.21 million minimum salary isn't guaranteed, then it goes to $15 million in savings. So the Dolphins are getting 90% of their cap savings that they're going to get from this transaction out in front. And it allows Terron grace and time to make a decision. And it's playing like the best case scenario for the Dolphins from a salary cap perspective. There's a talent conversation here. There's a how ready is Patrick Paul conversation here that I don't think we're going to know. But when you looked at the alternatives, which I I looked at in the Substack article and looked at what happens if Terron Armstead chooses to play. Do you max restructure him and carry him on the roster for another year? And then what does that look like if you max restructure him and then he retires in 2026, and how you'd have to carry that through June 1st? What happens if the Dolphins just move on outright with a pre-June 1st or a post-June 1st designation for him this year without manipulating the salary? All of these scenarios add up to, this is the way that gives the most grace to the team, and it gives the most grace to the player as he either makes the decision to retire, or if he makes the decision to have to play and not have to endure the experience of being cut from a team. So what is the outcome? I have some thoughts on likelihood of outcomes, and we're going to get into that next. You're on Locked on Dolphins, so make sure that you guys stick with us. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on all of the action than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off, or if you want to bet on the fourth quarter comeback for your favorite team, you can always stay in on the action. And if you're looking for bigger payouts, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting app feature because it keeps every moment throughout the game exciting. Whether you are hoping for that late game rally and you want to see your favorite team win simultaneously, or you're picking for a player to hit a clutch 3, you never feel like you miss your chance. Plus, the app is easy to use. So when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. So what happens, right? There's 3 outcomes from here. The first is Terron Armstead retires, in which case nothing will change. The Dolphins will have served $13.8 million in cap space, and they will carry that all the way through till June 1st. There's no harm in carrying him at this stage other than a top 51 roster spot. But you're talking about if you were to process his retirement before June 1st, he's going to have $18 million in dead money because you're processing the retirement before June 1st. All that dead money is going to accelerate up into this year's salary cap. So you're going to lose about, if all the dead money accelerates up, you're going to lose about $9.5 million in cap space. And then you only are going to get, and then you have to account for another player on the 51. So you're going to lose about $10 million in cap space if you process this retirement pre-June 1st. Is there benefit to wiping the books and slate completely clean and not taking the dead money into 2026? Yeah, there's benefit to doing that. But now that this domino has been tipped over, I think it's very likely that a Terron Armstead retirement is processed pre-June 1st, and you're taking all of the hit up front. So I think option 1 is Terron does decide to retire, and it's a post-June 1st transaction for the team, which is going to split the salary cap hit of 17.9 this year and then 10.7 next year. Option number 2, Terron Armstead decides to play, and the team moves on. This can happen at any point now, where if Terron Armstead, because he's restructured his contract down, Terron Armstead at any point can decide to play, and the team could say, well, it's been great, but we're moving in a different direction. And if that happens, then you post June 1st to designate the cut for Terron, but you've already gotten the adjusted salary benefit. So you're carrying his cap hit or his cap allocations through June 1st at the $9 million figure instead of the $23.5 million figure because he restructured his contract down. That's a win for the Dolphins. So now you can post June 1st cut him, and you can rest easy knowing that you saved $13 million in cap space. So that benefit for Miami is, I think, a very likely one in the event that Terron decides to play. The third scenario is Terron decides to play, and he makes his decision after the first wave in free agency, after the NFL draft, and the Dolphins look at what they got on the offensive line and said, hey, we really shored up the interior spots. The draft didn't fall our way to draft somebody that's tackle capable the way that maybe we hope that it would. We could probably benefit from having Terron Armstead on the roster for another year and just stave off the Patrick Paul era for another year. If that happens, what has to happen from these two parties, and this is where I think some of the parade that Terron got yesterday, and Terron is, like I said, he's an outstanding dude. He is one of the greatest talents that I've watched play for this football team in my time as a fan of the team. He's an amazing leader. He's an amazing mentor. He's amazing in the community. But this wasn't, and this does the Dolphins a solid. But I can't imagine a world in which the Dolphins and Terron Armstead would not have to sit down at the negotiating table and figure out a re-amended contract that features some kind of signing bonus or option bonus, in addition to probably a very heavily incentive-laden reworked language on top of the minimum salary. So you'd probably, after June, probably pay him a lump sum check if he was going to play this year, and then probably tether a lot of compensation to games in which he's active on game day. And that's the path for him staying in Miami and playing. I'll say this too, because I know Terron gets a lot of grief at times because he's one of the faces of this past build that we're transitioning out of. If we want to be honest about what the timeline is of the team, that I think the last build is done, right? And you're transitioning, you're a team in transition at this point. And this is, I think, further evidence of that. But Terron Armstead signed a contract here with a player who had durability questions coming in, and he's become kind of one of the faces of what a lot of people take exception to with Chris Grier. But I looked it up yesterday. Terron, in the 3 years that he's been in Miami, in descending order, ranks 12th, 18th, and 36th amongst cash received for NFL offensive linemen in his 3 seasons in Miami, as far as like the descending order of the ranks. Only once received top 15 NFL offensive line money. And this past year ranked 36th. It's really not bad value for an amazing player, an amazing leader, an amazing mentor, an amazing person in the community who just so happens to have durability issues and is playing through whatever his knee issue is that he's been battling the last couple of years. That goes back to what Mike McDaniel said yesterday about compounding variables and multiple things being able to be true. And I can say all those complimentary things about Terron Armstead while also saying the team's approach to high-risk players from a durability standpoint is a problem and needs to be better. But that also leads me to believe that the more likely outcomes here, with this being a player that the Dolphins already have a succession plan in place, is that Terron Armstead probably has played his last snap for the Dolphins. It'd be my guess at this point in time. Because 2 out of the 3 outcomes that Terron and the team coming to this amended decision to gear down the salary on the contract make the departure very easy to execute. Whether that's Terron says, I'm good, I want to go out on a high note, and I would consider last year to be a high note for Terron. It's the most snaps he's played in an NFL season in about like 4 or 5 years. Or Terron says, hey, I'm kicking, I'm ready. And the team says, okay, well, go get your market. Best of luck. and we're going to designate you as a post-June 1st cut. We're going to carry the $9 million figure instead of a $22 million figure, and then we're going to split the dead cap across 2 seasons. So a little bit more sobering than when you first read it and you read, oh, Terron making this decision if he wants to play. He's surrendering $26.5 million in scheduled income to go down to the minimum salary to stay on the roster. If I was Terron Armstead with the legacy that I've had, I wouldn't want to be cut to end my career either while I'm still making the decision. So I think that's part of the benefit here to Terron. It's not out of the goodness and love of the game, let me play this year on minimum salary if I decide to play. That's going to do it for us here today on Locked On Dolphins. I'm Kyle Krabs here in Indianapolis for the NFL Combine. We'll have boots to the ground and ears on high alert for any whispers that we get, and whatever we hear, we will tackle tomorrow on the show. Hope you guys enjoyed. Keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. I'm out of here.